two of the most difficult sentences for human beings to speak are "I was wrong" and "I'm sorry." And so, once you go down this path of having to defend yourself, of having to defend defend Trump, it becomes very difficult to pivot 6 months in, 6 years in, whatever it is, to suddenly say, "My bad. All those times I was being a complete jerk about this stuff, I was wrong. You were right."
Hello, and welcome to the Politics Girl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Today's pod is a candid conversation with Nick Carmody, psychotherapist, lawyer, and executive board member for the World Mental Health Coalition. Nick is a survivor of not one, but two traumatic brain injuries, which inspired him to go back to school to better understand the brain and how it affects our functioning, personality, and emotional processing. After getting his master's in psychology, he started to look at politics and how politics affects the personality of the country. If there is already political science, he believes we should have political psychology. I'm having him on today to discuss what's going on with the Republican Party from a psychological perspective and how the cult of personality has transformed the party into a tribe who are essentially devoted to Trump and Trumpism, no matter how much damage they do to themselves or to the country. Nick gives us insight into the human instinct behind Trumpism, which we're going to need as we go head-to-head with this group for the soul of the nation. And for those of you listening, I just want to apologize for my voice. I know I sound like a little but that's because I am getting over COVID, and this is the way it is. It might sound a bit wonky, but the context of the podcast will be incredibly clear. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, psychotherapist, lawyer, and executive board member for the World Mental Health Coalition, Nick Carmody. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate being here.
Well, thank you for joining me. I've been following your work for a while, and you have such a unique way of looking at the country from a mental health perspective. As a psychotherapist and as a board member of the World Mental Health Coalition, who I believe their goal is to educate and empower the public and policymakers against dangerous political leadership, you must be having a professional field day with this rise of authoritarianism in America.
Well, I just recently joined in June. It's Bandy Lee is the president of that. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is on there, and it was an honor just to be considered to be invited on that, let alone to be brought on. And so I'm just kind of getting my feet wet with that. But in addition to trying to warn the world or the country about pathology and leadership, one of the goals that we're trying to transition to is basically trying to heal the country. I mean, we've kind of already got that point where the warning is already understood. We see what's going on. It's pretty self-evident. Now, at this point, it's, what do we do about it? How do we fix this? How do we deal with the division, the antagonism, and hopefully try to avoid political violence? Because as we've seen the last couple of days with the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago, the violent rhetoric has really amped up.
Yeah, no, it really has. I mean, the call for civil war is all over the place right now. It's bananas. It's people are just dying to use their guns. So let's talk about the most recent news. The FBI and the Justice Department has a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago, and the right is absolutely losing their minds, right? That it's some deep state witch hunt when it's simply just democracy and justice in action. I believe you don't become the first FBI director, the first attorney general, and the first federal judge in our nation's history to grant a search and seizure warrant for the home of a former president unless you've seen rock solid proof, right? So no matter what we hear the Republicans and the right-wing pundits saying on television, there is just absolutely no way these people went off half-cocked, right? Legal experts are being very clear. There is not a soul, not even the most liberal judge, and in this case it was a Trump-appointed judge, who would sign off on a search of a former private residence of a president without absolutely solid proof that crimes had taken place or were taking place right now. So we have these Trump Republicans in complete denial, some refusing to believe there was an actual search, some thinking it's a witch hunt. The new one is that the FBI is there to plant evidence, right? But it's all about this deep state that's hell-bent on taking their savior down. The GOP judiciary tweeted that if they can do this to a former president, imagine what they can do to you. Dan Bongino was just on Fox News saying that this is some third world bullshit. They're out here talking about Hillary Clinton and Hunter Biden, who they very clearly want to lock up without any proof of a crime. They're threatening Merrick Garland with arrest and congressional subpoenas for doing his job. They're attacking the FBI itself as corrupt. They're asking to defund the FBI. And yet the head of the FBI is a Trump appointee and clearly not some left-wing zealot. The right-wing media and the far-right GOP are selling this like it is some kind of monstrous overstep, when this is literally the perfect example of how justice is supposed to work in a democracy. So the projection here is astounding. But as we start to see the wheels of justice turning, you've been very clear that holding Trump accountable isn't going to change the mind of most of his supporters, even if we see smoking gun evidence. So can you talk me through that psychologically?
Let me see if I can back up. I mean, there was a lot there that you mentioned. I think, first and foremost, we're at a really dangerous place as a country where one political party thinks that every election that they lose is fixed, and every investigation against somebody in their tribe is a witch hunt or a hoax. And that's a really dangerous place to be, where we can't accept any outcome unless we win, and we don't accept any investigation unless it's happening to the other guy.
Right.
And that's just impossible to function, and maybe impossible to survive as a country. Another part of it too, and this is something that that just as a society in general, is we know very little about this investigation. And unfortunately, everybody rushes to it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where everybody rushes. The less we know about something, the more confident we feel about speaking about something authoritatively. We don't know a damn thing about this damn. I mean, we can speculate that, because that, as you laid it out, that's how the justice system works. So we can assume that that's happening, but without even making assumptions, it's incredibly irresponsible and dangerous to, without knowing anything about this investigation, to immediately demagogue and to immediately propagandize what's going on with this investigation. Because, what if Trump, what if there is smoking gun evidence that Trump was handing off classified information to some foreign adversary? We don't know that, but if we're starting from the starting point is immediately it's a hoax or it's a witch hunt, it's hard to walk that back, because two of the most difficult sentences for human beings to speak are "I was wrong" and "I'm sorry." And so, a lot of what happens with Trumpism is that I think initially there were a lot of people who didn't vote for Trump. They voted against Hillary, right? And when their vote for Hillary became an indictment of their morality because of Trump's lack of morality, they suddenly became very, motivated to exonerate themselves, to exonerate their morality. And one of the ways to do that was they could exonerate themselves by exonerating Trump. Well, where are you going to find Trump's exoneration? Well, you're going to find it on Bannon. You're going to find it on Rush Limbaugh. You're going to find it on Fox News. You're going to find it on OAN. And so confirmation bias kicks in. In this case, the bias is, I'm a good person, right? I didn't vote for a bad guy. I voted for what I thought was a bad woman against Hillary Clinton. And so I need to exonerate myself. I need to confirm the bias that I'm a good person. And so I'm going to seek out bias confirming news sources to tell me that I'm a good person. And in order to do that, they're going to be telling me that Trump is either a good guy, or he's not a bad guy, or he's innocent of all these other things. And so, once you go down this path of having to defend yourself, of having to defend defend Trump, it becomes very difficult to pivot 6 months in, a year and a half in, 2 years in, 6 years in, whatever it is, after you've been standing by this guy every step of the way, arguing with your liberal niece, who's in college, or arguing with a sibling, or arguing, with your friend, from high school, or whatever it is, to suddenly say, my bad, all those times I was being a complete, jerk about this stuff, I was wrong, you were right. People, it's difficult for people to do that. And so, it's the farther you get, the more off ramps that you pass up, the more difficult it is to finally take an off ramp, because, we are invested with our ego, we are invested with our identity. There's research that has shown, fMRI research that has shown that the same areas of the brain that light up when we experience physical pain will also light up when we experience social isolation or exclusion, right? And so what that will show is that there's potentially a pain avoidance type of experience that occurs when we find ourselves disagreeing with or pushing back against a group of people, a tribe that we derive a sense of identity from, or a sense of community from, whether that's a church, whether that's our family, because families may be, if it's a family down south and everybody's conservative and you're maybe you're not even a liberal, maybe you're just never Trump curious. It's difficult to now suddenly express that and be ostracized by the family, or be ostracized by your church, or be ostracized by, guys at the gym, or, whatever that sense of community or that particular group is, it becomes very difficult. And it's much easier to remain comfortably wrong than to be uncomfortably right. If being uncomfortably right means that you have to either maybe experience this pain avoidance issue that's going on with the brain, or being uncomfortably right means that you have to basically be excommunicated from a group that you identify with, have a sense of community, and maybe derive your identity from.
Right. You don't want to not be able to go to church because you don't agree with people. You don't want to not be able to hang out with your family. You don't want to not be able to go to your workplace if everyone's feeling one way and you're the outsider. No one wants that. But also, these true believers, this behavior, this searching of Mar-a-Lago, it kind of further convinces them of what they believe to be true, right? If they think that there's some deep state witch hunt and all of a sudden you have the FBI going into Trump's house, or you have them prosecuting Trump for crimes, it can kind of convince them that they were right about the deep state to begin with, right? It's almost like their own confirmation bias that watching this happen, the rule of law happening, is the proof that the deep state exists and is trying to shut down the guy who wants to break up the deep state, right? It's almost like self-prophesizing.
Yeah, we're in a really, because of all the disinformation and all of the conspiracy theories and the deep state stuff, the QAnon stuff, is that we're in a really weird position where the more we fix the problem, the worse it gets. Right?
Yeah.
The more that the criminal justice system and the rule of law progresses and deals with the problem, right, holds somebody accountable, the worse the problem gets, because it's proof. It's proof on its face that the deep state exists because they're trying to take down Trump. And so, it's almost an impossible, almost an impossible situation. And it was something I wrote the other day where we're basically, as a country, you're faced with two choices and neither one of them are good. The country may be damaged by not holding Trump accountable to avoid political violence, but at that point, you're undermining the rule of law, or you're going to withhold the rule of law and you may potentially cause damage to the country because there's going to be political violence. And if the country's going to be damaged either way, then you do the right thing, you uphold the rule of law, and you just deal with the consequences of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't make these decisions. As somebody cleverer than me said, the role of justice is not to change hearts and minds, but to assign accountability to those who have violated our laws, which is why it's very essential with all the people that have been out here and a lot of left-wing people that have been out here saying, arrest Trump now, just get him, round up all these people, throw them in jail. And you're like, no, it is essential if we want to live in a country with a rule of law that we follow the law to such an extent that it is every I is dotted, every T is crossed, because you can see right now, everyone saw Trump took a bunch of stuff that he shouldn't have taken, a bunch of state secrets to Mar-a-Lago. The FBI has already been to his residence before to collect a bunch of boxes that he shouldn't have taken. This is the second time because they believe he held things back, that he still had things there. So we all know he has done this one crime. This has nothing to do with 1-6. It has nothing to do with trying to steal the election. It has nothing to do with the coup, nothing to do with tax evasion, nothing to do with shaking people down. This has to do with something we all know he did, which is take state secrets from the White House with him to his private residence when he left. So we have to follow the rule of law step by step by step, because there is no other way for us as a country to live under the rule of law. So the people that are calling for Trump to be arrested, calling for this to happen, you have to be very, very careful, because you can see right now, even this, which is the least political, all the people that have signed off are Trump appointees for the most part, aside from Merrick Garland, who has not shown himself to be some sort of left-wing zealot. But they're following the rule of law, and it's still a witch hunt. It's still wrong. It's still FBI is planting evidence. So that you can't win. So you have to follow the law exactly as it's meant to be, right? I think Jonathan Swift said, for those of you who don't know, he's a famous literary mind of the 17th century. He said, you cannot reason a person out of a position they did not reason themselves into in the first place, right? So we're not going to be able to convince people of one thing if they didn't use reason to get themselves in that position. This story isn't about the deep state. This story is about a former president who was and is a national security risk. You know, we all know he stole classified documents months ago, and I think they moved deliberately and diligently to get to where we were a couple of days ago, and we have to let justice play out no matter what comes of it, because that's how we function in a society that has laws.
Yeah, when we're facing authoritarian aspiring movement, it becomes very tempting to fight fire with fire.
Yes.
Or to hey, when they're going low, we're going high, and then they're kicking our ass, so we need to go low also, that type of mentality. But if your concern is if your objective is to preserve democracy, to preserve the rule of law, and then you are adopting the opposite, the rights tactics in order to preserve the rule of law or preserve democracy. Well, by adopting rights tactics, you're not preserving democracy and rule of law. You're guaranteeing that it's going to disappear.
Exactly.
And so you have to be really careful on process and how you handle all of those things. The other aspect of that is, this is where it gets into some stuff I've written about the weaponization of fear. But one of the things that we're seeing, and the right loves to do this, they project a lot. They make a lot of accusations about authoritarian overreach with vaccine mandates. You'll hear, one of the things that we see is that when people are scared, they will basically embrace an authoritarian movement in order to protect themselves and their tribe from the other tribe's authoritarian instincts. And so it basically becomes almost an authoritarian arms race, or proliferation of authoritarianism, where one side will, it just becomes everybody's trying to one up the other side in order to protect themselves from the other, the perceived authoritarianism of the other side. And what that does is, we're just, you're on the, it's like going downhill without brakes towards an authoritarian society.
Absolutely. I mean, fear is a huge part of it, right? People are afraid. In many ways, their fear defines them, right? Fear of loss of status, fear of not measuring up, fear of the other, fear of losing a way of life, fear of losing their country. For the past decade, an entire group of people have been exploiting this fear into making a lot of Americans kind of exist in this extreme fight or flight response. And it plays into our politics. I mean, you've pointed out that people have been conditioned to live in a near constant state of hypervigilance, to see enemies everywhere, to see everything as a threat to their survival. And we know that when people are scared, they seek the safety and protection of others, what you call a tribe, right? And the more scared people are, the more they are willing to pay or sacrifice for their tribe's protection. I think you have said that in many cases, people have been willing to compromise their own values, their own morality to stay as part of the tribe. That's what you're talking about. People don't want to be ostracized from their church, from their workplace, from their friends, from their family. What makes people do this?
A lot of it is self-preservation, right? A lot of it is, and one of the things we've seen, and I wrote something about this after it was the Patriot Front group. They were in that U-Haul going up to the Pride Festival, and I wrote something just about with the need for purpose and meaning. And one of the things we see a lot on the right is that they like to incorporate children into a lot of the narratives, whether it's Pizzagate, whether it's mask mandates, whether it's vaccine mandates, whether it's Disney, the grooming. Because if you can basically frame the issue as one where you are protecting children, well, then basically anything that follows is justified, because who will argue against, or who will not support an action or a movement that protects children. And so it becomes an ends justifies the means type of scenario, that basically you can justify almost anything, any type of action, if it falls under the guise of protecting kids. And so one of the things that we see a lot, Trump lost in 2020. Trump lost a lot of support with suburban moms, right, with suburban women. And so, that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of the narratives circling around children, because that's one of the ways to bring back suburban moms and women back in for 2024 or 2022, is to make them believe that their kids are under threat, whether it's grooming, whether it's the trans stuff, whether,
CRT,
whatever,
books,
CRTs, and
book banning.
And so, that's one of the ways that, they try to frame this. And there's been research that has shown that exposure to chronic stress and to chronic fear literally rewires the brain so that when we encounter a subsequent fearful or stressful situation, we respond to it with more intensity and for a longer duration. And when you see that happening over and over and over, we start to become irrational and almost disproportionately react with our fear response to the threat. And that becomes definitely becomes a problem with our politics, because as we're talking about with political violence, when people feel threatened, they will either defend themselves ultimately with violence, or they will seek out someone who will defend them. And we've seen this. A lot of times people will defend the tribe who will defend them. Right? We've seen pro-life Christians who will defend Republicans and the NRA, even though it clearly goes against their pro-life and Christian values. However, who are the people, who are the politicians, who are the tribe that's defending religious freedom? Well, it's Republicans. So you make that trade-off, and you basically the ends justifies the means. Well, we're not we don't agree with maybe some of the gun laws. We don't agree with the lack of initiatives being taken to protect kids in school shootings. However, this is the tribe that protects us, so we're going to defend that tribe.
Right. But also people are being told to be scared all the time. I mean, if you watch right-wing media, Tucker's out here saying, when they come for you, and they will, this kind of stuff. And Republicans play into it by calling Democrats the enemy, the evil Democrats, the pro-life, and I use the term very loosely because they're not. They talk about baby killers. QAnon itself, right, is all into people being pedophiles and monsters and, this kind of thing. So this fear, people are scared because they've been conditioned to be scared, right? And
Absolutely.
they're being told that because it works.
Yes, it does work. And the other thing about, and this goes back to the violence, is that when you can dehumanize your enemy, it makes it much easier to commit atrocities or to be inhumane to that person, because
Right.
they're evil, or they're pedophiles, or whatever it may be. And so that that's definitely a part of it for sure.
Yeah, that's why this grooming talk around the LGBTQIA plus community or around the trans community is so dangerous, because it dehumanizes those communities and paints them out as pedophiles and as groomers, which also takes away from real groomers who are out there actually grooming kids.
Well, yeah, one of the things when I was on the Lincoln Project podcast, that was one of the things I was talking about with regards to finding purpose and meaning and trying to protect kids, is that we don't see the Patriot Front showing up at NRA headquarters, right? When kids are getting shot up at schools, we don't see them showing up at Smith and Wesson's manufacturing plant after kids are getting shot up. We didn't see them. There was a recent sex scandal with the Southern Baptist Church. I think might be Russell Moore. He's a preacher. I think he's been speaking out against this, against what's been going on with that. We don't see the Patriot Front, protesting the Southern Baptist Church. We don't see them protesting the Catholic Church with all the stuff that they had going on for years. So it tends to be very selective. It tends to be very targeted. But as you said, it's very effective.
Well, it's also, you pick and choose when these problems are problems. We are all law and order, all thin blue line, all, back the blue until the FBI raids your savior's house. And then we are defund the FBI. Law, the law is broken. It only works if it works for them. And I think people have to start seeing that that's an impossible position to live in.
Well, it goes back to tribalism. I mean, we defend our tribe and our people at all costs, and we will attack the other tribe and the other people at all costs. The other tribe can do no right, and our tribe can do no wrong. And it's such an absolute state of mind that we're in with tribalism that it's just not sustainable.
Now, a lot of people leading this charge to tribalism, to Trumpism, to authoritarianism, to the hate and fear of the other are what I would call small, scared little boys. Men that are basically posturing as alphas, if you believe in the alpha beta concept, which I think is destructive way of looking at the world. But if we want to talk about it as an alpha, we look at Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Ben Shapiro. These are not alphas in the old school sense of the word. These are not men we would look to lead us. These are posturing bullies, kind of squishy little betas who are trying to convince themselves that they are alphas. And they're trying to function in a world of lying bullies like Trump and DeSantis. And as a previous guest of ours, Mark Green, recently said, this slide into extremism is the result of these weak, insecure men trying to outdo each other, right? Doubling down on sexist, racist, anti-Semitic, xenophobic rhetoric and to outman each other. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, and this goes more, beyond just the masculinity aspect of it, is unfortunately right now, the incentive structure positively reinforces and rewards division and antagonism, the tribalism, chaos, and until that changes, it's difficult to see that whether it's Tucker Carlson or Bannon or anybody else who's very divisive changing. And it's unfortunately it usually ends up being money that changes things, whether it's lawsuits or whether it's defamation suits or whether it's just tort liability, or whether it's advertisers no longer paying or cable channels no longer funding Fox, whatever it is, because our society is so money based. But right now for those guys, that's what gets them attention. That's what gets them, people to pay attention to them. And as long as they are receiving, in some cases, some of it is pathological, as long as they're receiving narcissistic supply for the things they're saying, for the things they're doing, they're going to continue to do it.
Well, speaking of capitalism and a financially based society, we need to take a quick break to thank the sponsors who made this episode possible. We'll be right back after this with Nick Carmody. So a couple of years ago, I was feeling crappy all the time. I couldn't figure out what was wrong, why I was feeling so droopy and tired. So I ordered the Everlywell food sensitivity test and got a full report on what foods did and didn't agree with my system. It really opened my eyes and helped me make a better decision about what I put in my body and what my body could really process. What if you could use science to discover more about your health? With Everlywell, you can. Their at-home lab tests will help get the knowledge and support you need to become a healthier version of yourself. With over 30 tests to choose from, you'll be able to pick the test that makes the most sense for you to get the answers you need about the health you want. They have everything from the food sensitivity test I took to a woman's health test when you're experiencing symptoms but don't even know where to start. Everlywell ships their products straight to your door with everything you need in one package. You take your home lab test, collect your sample, use the included prepaid shipping label to mail the test back to a certified lab, and then your physician-reviewed results are sent straight to your phone or device in days. You can then share those results with your doctor to help guide the next step. It's so simple that over 1 million people have trusted Everlywell to support their health and wellness goals. And for listeners of this show, Everlywell is offering a special discount of 20% off an at-home lab test at everlywell.com/politicsgirl. That's everlywell.com/politicsgirl for 20% off your next home lab test. everlywell.com/politicsgirl. Imagine having one extra day a week, more time to cook healthier meals, watch the movie you want, or spend more time with your family. ClickUp believes that's possible. ClickUp is a productivity platform that guarantees to save you 1 day a week of work. ClickUp began with the idea that productivity was broken, that there were too many tools to keep track of, too many things in separate ecosystems, and they believed there had to be a more productive way to get through your day. ClickUp is the one tool to house your tasks, projects, documents, goals, and spreadsheets. It's packed with features and customization options that no other productivity tool has, so you can work the way you work best. Whether you're in project management, engineering, sales, marketing, or HR, ClickUp has an easy-to-use solution that creates a more efficient work environment. Join the more than 800,000 highly productive teams using ClickUp today. Use code PoliticsGirl to get 15% off ClickUp's massive unlimited plan for a year, which means you can start reclaiming your time for under $5 a month. Sign up today at clickup.com and use the code PoliticsGirl at checkout. So I was recently in Toronto visiting my friends and family, and I only packed Third Love bras. The thing about a good bra is it makes you look good, it feels good, and you start to not want to wear anything else. And Third Love has a bra for every occasion. Their best-selling 24/7 t-shirt bra, their Form wireless, their unlined bras, their strapless styles. They even have limited edition summer styles and colors to work with any outfit. And you might be thinking, but Lee, I don't wear a bra. Well, someone in your life does. And I'm telling you that this company is for them to shop from. It doesn't dig. It doesn't pull. It comes in sizes A through H with Third Love's exclusive half cup sizes. Yeah, you heard me right. That is half cup sizes. And Third Love makes it easy to find a bra that actually fits with their fitting room quiz. The fitting room quiz is like a personal shopper, but better because you don't have to go anywhere and it's less embarrassing. It focuses on size, shape, fit issues, and helps you find the styles that are perfect for you. The fitting room quiz has helped over 18 million women find their true bra size. You could be next. And if you don't love your fit, exchanges and returns are free for 60 days. So give your boobs, or some boobs you know, the comfort and support they deserve. Upgrade your bras today and get 20% off your first order at thirdlove.com/politicsgirl. That's 20% off at thirdlove.com/politicsgirl. Let's talk a little bit about narcissism, right? I mean, that kind of falls into a lot of this work. And you've talked a lot about narcissism. You have a lot of personal experience with it as well. Narcissistic behaviors and religion and conspiracy theories, they're kind of parallel, right? We see the parallels between narcissists like Trump and what you call collective narcissism of groups like the evangelicals, where they feel like they are better, and this self-righteousness that religion often provides for people is extremely attractive to people who view themselves with pathological levels of grandiose or superiority. This kind of all-knowing, all-powerful, godlike figure that religious people use, where they are the chosen people, also kind of fits into this all-knowing, godlike figure that Trump is. And they have a personal relationship with them, either a personal relationship with God because they're such a good person, or a personal relationship with their savior, Donald Trump, because they have been supporting him the whole time. And they are literally singled out or favored by this person. And it's intoxicating to people, right? That there's like an us and them thing. We are favored. We are the favored group. And it makes it easier to understand how people can keep ignoring what's best for them, keep ignoring what's, you keep thinking like, why do these people keep voting against their own best interests? Like, why do these people keep making decisions that are against their religion or against what's best for them? And I think it comes back to this idea that they feel special, either chosen by God or chosen by Trump to support his way of being. And it's sort of a narcissistic way of looking at things, that they are chosen and better and superior.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what I've written about. There's a lot there. I mean, I think as far as with Trump, I think for a lot of them, there's just almost like an exchange that occurs that, they kind of vicariously lived through his larger than life presence and his, kind of his grandiosity, dating the supermodel and being allegedly a billionaire. And, in exchange for them kind of vicariously living through him, they kind of took on his persecution narrative and his grievances. So I think for them, that was part of the draw, for a lot of his followers in that sense. As far as religion, I try to be a little bit careful about it because obviously, there's a whole spectrum of religion, and not everybody falls into the same categories. But I think for a lot of people, or at least for narcissists, religion can be very appealing because there is that, I have a personal relationship with an all-powerful, all-knowing deity, or he curries favor on me, he looks after me. So I think there is a certain gravitational pull for narcissists with religion.
Well, I mean, I think religion fits into it, right? I mean, I think it has to.
The religion definitely creates an us and them mentality.
Right.
A lot of times in life, we will define ourselves by an enemy. And if we don't have an enemy and we need an enemy to define ourselves, we will seek one out. And religion does provide a natural us versus them because it's believers versus non-believers. The persecution narrative often runs through many religions. We've seen this, and even not just in religion, but if you look throughout history, we have often as a society, we will create an enemy in order to kind of define ourselves as the good guys. And it doesn't even have to be a person. It can be, we go to war on drugs, we go to war on poverty, we go to war on terror, we go to war, on a lot of different things. And, we're kind of a society that needs to be at war with something, or needs to have an enemy, because it allows us to define ourselves, respective to that enemy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, other people or another group, but oftentimes it is.
And it also makes us feel like we're on the right side of that war. We're the good guy, right? Which goes back to what you were saying before. People want to believe that they are a good person, that they voted against Hillary because they thought she was the worst person. And now they need to double down on their support of Trump because it justifies how they feel about themselves. But there's definitely a whole group of people who believe that Trump is God's plan. And if Trump is God's plan, then they have to support it no matter how absurd it becomes, right? Religious people are by nature, and I'm saying this as someone who grew up in the church, already conditioned to believe things without proof and ignore truth for faith. And I feel like Trumpism itself is almost morphing into a religion where you have to believe the dogma, the on high leader, and things don't have to make sense. You just have to have faith, and you just have to be there and be 100% supportive of it.
Yeah, and that becomes difficult because, it's, of course, if people believe that God, Trump is president because of God's will, well, then was Obama president because of God's will? It goes back to that kind of the selective perception of things.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, they're not thinking that way. But yeah, if you believe that a leader was handpicked by God, then there's nothing that he can do that you will criticize or abandon him for, because by doing so, you're going against God's will, and that becomes, I think it becomes a very dangerous mindset, because there's no accountability. There's nothing that he can do wrong that will, cause them to peel away from him.
And I think it gives people a purpose, and I think people seek purpose. I think people are lost a bit in our society. We have let people down. We have left people behind. We've allowed capitalism to take over to the point of ignoring our people, and people seek purpose. And being a foot soldier in, Trump's revolution to save the country certainly has a lot more purpose than, your regular 9-to-5 job that you don't like that much and living in some house that you never really wanted to live in. It gives people more of a sense of who they are in the world. And it's hard to fight against that.
Yeah, that was something I've written about, as far as veterans coming back and why they're more susceptible to radicalization and extremism, is that, for a lot of these guys, they were exposed to some of the best technology in the world. They were, fighting wars. They were taking out bad guys. They were, defending the country, protecting the country. And, too often, as we just saw with like the burn pit bill, they come back and they're underappreciated. The healthcare isn't that good. We had at least at one point, it was 22 suicides a day that were occurring from veterans. A lot of them are homeless. They're living in isolation. They have, PTSD. They have mental health problems. And, when you go, it's tough to peak in life when you're 18 or 22 years old, or, whatever it may be. And now suddenly when you're in your 30s and you're working a menial job, and somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, the election's been stolen. Hey, soldier, we need you to help us steal the election back, or we need you to be part of our militia group. We got all these, these grand plans. We're going to protect the country from, the authoritarian left, or whatever it may be. Well, that becomes a very appealing sales pitch to a guy who's, maybe reading a barcode reader at Walmart, and suddenly he can go and use his very unique skills that he was trained on, and use, very unique technology or weapons or whatever it may be. And so that, that's a very powerful pull for those, for certain veterans, for certain people. I haven't seen any research on this, but I am curious to see, as militia groups have increased in membership, if the number of daily suicides for vets has actually decreased, because in kind of a perverse way, they're providing purpose and meaning for these vets to be part of a tribe or part of a community, as we talked about earlier. One of the things that we're seeing is there's a little bit of we're seeing kind of a realignment with the populism movement on the right. And, for decades, it just goes back to capitalism, as you were saying. For decades, Rush Limbaugh was telling people on the right to defend the establishment, big business, big corporations, institutions, and so they did. And now Steve Bannon tells them, to tear down everything they used to defend, and so they will. And even now, we're seeing one of the big movements is, they're anti-pharmaceutical, and pharmaceutical industry has a lot to be held accountable for, right? But it's been kind of politicized around the vaccines during COVID, right? But one of the things that
I would say they're anti-science, not just anti-pharmaceutical.
Oftentimes, but one of the things that I would say is it's not always black and white anti-science. It's at least from their perspective, it's a different perspective on the science, because you can run into a lot of people who are anti-COVID vaccines, and it's not that they're just anti-vaccines or anti-science. They will run through a litany of statistics on the vaccines and the health issues that we'll have. So it's not that they're necessarily against the science. They're self-selecting, right? They're kind of selectively choosing which science or which studies, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be certain studies to which they believe, because it's not necessarily being anti-science, it's being pro-science that aligns with their political tribalism.
Yeah, selectively choosing, which goes back to your concept of confirmation bias. You go with the information that feeds what you already believe, right?
And similarly with like the capitalism stuff is, you see a lot of people on the right who are, they are vehemently against the pharmaceutical industry because of the way that it has exploited society and people, and yet they will still reflexively defend the fossil fuel industry that has also exploited society and people and the earth. And again, it's not necessarily because they're anti-capitalism or they've suddenly turned into Steve Bannon's the righteous indignation of the working class, because it's not consistent across the board. That they will still defend certain big businesses or certain industries if it aligns with the tribalism of their political beliefs.
Right. And Steve Bannon is a Leninist who wants it all to burn anyway. So let's maybe not follow him. You've said that the biggest question is, how do we fix this? And it's the most important question that we face as a country. So in your opinion, how do we fix this?
This goes back to, I think, what I said earlier, and it's difficult. It is super complex. I have people in my personal life that that I care about and that I love who we don't see eye to eye. They think that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. That my work sucks. It's awful, and we have really toxic arguments about this stuff, and it's really difficult to see how we bring this back together. I think one of the ways is that we have to be careful of our phrasing and our verbiage. Brainwashing and deprogramming. Nobody is going to be receptive to what you have to say or meeting you halfway if your premise is that you're starting that, well, you're brainwashed or you need to be deprogrammed. That immediately causes people to armor up, to guard up. And the reality of it is both sides thinks the other side has been brainwashed. The right thinks the left's been brainwashed by the mainstream media, and the left thinks that the right's been brainwashed by Trump, Fox News, Bannon, all these other things. And so it's really difficult to find that space in the middle where people can talk. But especially, and I think this is the main thing, is that until the incentive structure changes, as long as we are rewarding people who are creating chaos, who are creating division and antagonism, as long as they are being rewarded for that, and it is profitable for that, it is their careers take off because of that, they're getting notoriety and attention. As long as that continues to happen, it's difficult to see that this is going to change, because people follow the leaders and their media sources that they trust. And if those media sources are creating division, then it's going to trickle down into the masses, and there's going to continue to be division.
Yeah, no, I've always said that we need to stop the spread of disinformation. I mean, I think that's the first step, right? We need new laws around lying. Right now, watching all these senators on television, not just media personalities, but senators saying, I think the FBI has planted information. That should not be allowed on national television. It should not be allowed to be someone of that position lying like that on national television.
Well, it's very irresponsible. What is really dangerous is, Steve Bannon was on Alex Jones' show, I think it was yesterday, and he was saying how, he's worried that the left is going to try to assassinate Trump. I mean, that is incredibly inciting. I mean, at a minimum level, that's inciting. The problem we have is, we're constantly dismissing violent rhetoric and inciting language because it's like, well, it's just, it's political speech. It's just people talking. But the problem is that when you're dealing with tens of millions of people, it only takes a fraction of 1% to be emotionally and psychologically unhinged to act upon that. And,
Absolutely.
it's almost shocking at this point that we haven't had an assassination attempt. And when you have a guy like Bannon, who's got a huge audience, he's very influential, and he's talking about, he thinks that somebody on the left is going to assassinate Trump. Well, one of the phrases that I use in my writings is preemptive retaliation. Well, if somebody is deranged or unhinged on the right, and he or she thinks that there's going to be an assassination attempt, well, maybe they try to preempt that, or they try to head that off and commit preemptive retaliation. They're going to retaliate for something that hasn't happened yet, but preemptively. And it's right now, it's a political tinderbox, and all it needs right now is one spark to set this off and potentially go down a really bad course with political violence and maybe even civil war. I'm working on a piece I'm going to be writing about civil war and some possible solutions to avoid that. But when I see stuff like what happened with Mar-a-Lago and what Bannon's saying, it almost feels like it's, the solutions feel quaint and almost obsolete at that point. One of the things that I wrote about this morning is that, often what we've seen on the right is projection, right? We've seen it with Trump, where nearly every accusation or criticism is a confession or admission, right? We see that a lot with cluster B personality disorders, narcissism, sociopathy. And so when I hear Bannon talking like that, and we see a situation where the right is lusting for the DeSantis regime to take over, the inevitability of this DeSantis regime. And you see a situation with Trump where, with the January 6th hearings, you're seeing Trump supporters they're almost looking for him. They're kind of questioning whether they want to support him again because they know they have DeSantis waiting in the wings. Well, if Trump is starting to become a political liability, right now he's already a martyr with the raid, right? So what would be the ultimate form of martyrdom, right? Is if somehow Trump went away, right? But it was believed or perceived that the left did it, but it didn't occur by the left, right? That would be the spark that would ignite the tinderbox of politics that could really create something bad. And just the fact that Bannon's saying something like that is incredibly irresponsible and incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and he should be held accountable for it. The fact that he can be on Alex Jones's show at this point when Alex Jones was just held responsible for his lies is where we need to start. I think we need to get money out of politics so corporations and the ultra-rich can't buy Republicans to do their bidding or buy any politician to do their bidding. But we need a fairness doctrine for the new millennium. We need truth in broadcasting laws, and we need tougher slander laws because ultimately, like you said, we are a money-based society and lawsuits can help. But the fact that Alex Jones is still able to promote this kind of dangerous rhetoric is something that is hurting the country. And I think ultimately we can't be dissuaded by people threatening us with violence, right? Threatening us if we hold Trump accountable, threatening us if we hold any Republicans accountable. The situation you mentioned before, it's exactly what you said. We find ourselves where we either hold a corrupt former president accountable for his crimes and risk violence from the right, or we allow this corruption to go unpunished and set a precedent that the president, whomever they are, is above the law. Both options are terrible, right? But like you said, if we're going to hurt the country, we should hurt the country by doing the right thing. And holding a president accountable for his crimes and his enablers accountable for their crimes is what needs to happen. Otherwise, we spark a constitutional and political crisis by not holding these people accountable, right? It's going to be bad anyway, so we may as well have it be bad by doing the correct thing and holding the rule of law accountable.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for joining me today, Nick.
Thank you
Your
for having me
insight
on.
is essential. I think people should be reading your writing because we are facing something the nation has never faced before. And if people want to follow your work moving forward and get your insight for themselves, how should they do that?
So I'm at Twitter at Nick_Carmody, and I have a Patreon site that is free. There's no paywall that I try to rewrite. It's probably over 100 articles. I try to rewrite every thread that I write on there in article form. It's a little bit easier to read, and that is patreon.com/Nick Carmody.
Yeah. And the Patreon account is actually amazing because Nick writes very long Twitter threads and he puts them all together on the Patreon account to really get the full concept. And it's absolutely worthwhile reading. So thank you so much for your time, Nick. I really appreciate your insight. And I hope you'll come back again and we can talk about this when maybe things are a little bit better.
Would love to.
Thank you. So that was Nick Carmody, psychotherapist and lawyer, talking to us about the human behavior behind politics. Things are screwed up, but we can't fix something we don't understand. Knowing the why is the first step to giving people an off-ramp to a different choice. People seek purpose and belonging, and we need to convince them that they can find both away from this criminal authoritarian party and the violence and hatred they bring to America. I think we can do that, one law and one conversation at a time. I want to thank Nick for joining us today and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go out and make the world a better place. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Midas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.